Hello, welcome back to the channel. So I've kind of had this feeling for a while now. It's that like a lot of the elements in StarRail do kind of feel not necessarily like they don't matter, because they do definitely still matter, because you obviously want to bring the correct element to the correct fights, but they kind of just feel way more like superficial, like characters only have elements because they have to, and not really for any sort of interesting like gameplay reasons. It just kind of feels like a thing that like is a requirement more than like actually interesting. Like the only characters that really like interact with elements are like the dot characters, which we haven't gotten since 2.0 with Black Swan, which is still insane to me. I mean, Break does technically interact with elements as well, but like they don't really care about the actual element besides like maybe like the set that Firefly uses, but even then that set could be like any element and it would still work the same way, you know? Like it's mainly just the break bar that they care about. The elements just feel like super underutilized as a mechanic, and the only archetype that actually does use it in an interesting way has basically just been abandoned. I mean, Dot is the only archetype that doesn't have a dedicated support. Like, dude, even Acheron kind of has a dedicated support in, like, Jiaoqiu. Anyway, I'm kind of getting off topic. Like, even some of the new characters' elements just don't make any sense, and it feels like they were just like, oh, I don't know, just put a random element. Like, why is My Day imaginary? Like, nothing about him says imaginary at all. How is he not fire? Like, everything about him screams fire. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. The only reason I could maybe see is because we just got Fugue, who is also fire, but we also just got Sunday, who is also an imaginary male character. So it's like, that also just doesn't make any sense. And it's like it almost feels like they're like overcompensating, because at the beginning of the game, we didn't have many imaginary characters, and now we're just getting like way too many, I'm gonna be honest. But to be honest, the more egregious one, to me, is Aglaya being lightning. Like for My Day, I can at least like almost see it, but for Aglaya, I cannot see it at all. Like nothing about her design, about anything about her, besides like maybe her gameplay, says lightning, but even then I think that she could have been like anything else. Like to be honest, I feel like imaginary almost fits her more than My Day. Like I don't know, I just don't get it. Like yeah, the elements just feel super underutilized as a mechanic, and I feel that there is like so much more potential that could be done with it besides like just dots. Like, you know, example, things like entanglement and imprisonment just kind of feel like they just exist. Like, it's not like they're bad effects to have, like you're not upset when they happen, but at the same time, don't really care, you know? Like, unless you're using someone like Welt, who's already a pretty niche character, like, you're only really gonna use him if you're maybe, like, using him in, like, an Acheron team, or if you're just doing some weird, like, speed stuff. Like, you know, as some examples of what I think could be maybe done to make them a bit more interesting, you can maybe have a character that does more damage based on how slow the enemies are, or maybe, like, just have, like, maybe have a support that makes slows more effective or something, or maybe for, like, entanglement, have a character that allows you to go past 5 entanglement stacks for, like, a big, like, nuke sort of playstyle, I guess. But obviously this doesn't need to be, like, exactly these things. I'm just, like, suggesting some random ideas. But I think it just shows that, like, there is more that can be done to make them feel more than just, like, mechanics that just exist for the sake of it, you know? That like, barely any characters utilize. Like, I don't think any characters utilize entanglement. I mean, I guess technically, like, a lot of the debuffs characters do, but at the same time, like, you could just use any other debuff for that. It's not specifically entanglement. No, I could also maybe see why some of these might not really work as full archetypes, because you would need to definitely be careful with how you design some of them if you wanted to make them like a full thing. Like, you know, freeze as an example. If you could just permanently freeze the enemies every single turn, that would kind of be broken, because you would just never take damage, and you would just be able to win every single fight automatically. Which is also probably why they removed it from Divergent Universe, because it was a little bit broken, I'm not gonna lie. A similar thing could also be probably said with imprisonment, even though I do think it is kind of underutilized. Like, if you could just slow the enemies every single turn, like, it would kind of just trivialize a lot of the combat, and you would just, like, the enemies just wouldn't be able to do anything, and you could just get a free win almost every single fight. But, like, besides I think those two, I think the rest of them are fine to be able to be expanded, even though a lot of them are just dots, but still. But even with the dots, like, a lot of characters do interact with a lot of the elemental debuffs. They just don't really work, because there is, like, almost no synergy. Like, Like, and a big example for me is probably like Hook, who I don't necessarily think is a bad character, even though there are some things that I would change about her. She just doesn't really work that well, because there is no real, like, burn synergy in the game. And the only real, like, fire scent that we have is kind of awful. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it's really bad. Like, the only character who applies burns somewhat consistently is Gwenifed. So, like, that's a very niche thing to work, and even then, it still just doesn't really feel that good to use. So, I don't know, I feel like there is more room to expand the debuffs to work with more than just Dot, but even at the same time, I also would maybe rather them kind of expand what the elements can do, because the statuses right now are kind of boring. Like, I'm not gonna lie, almost all of them are just dots, which is good, you know, for dot teams, and I don't think you should just, like, remove that. But it does kind of make them all feel very, like, similar to one another, and not really that different. Like, maybe you could have certain characters be able to create, like, elemental fields or something that buff characters of a certain element. Because, like, we did have stuff like Mono Quantum for a while, until it just kind of died. So I could maybe see, like, monoteams being, like, an interesting thing. Maybe have, like, a field that buffs characters of a certain element as an ultimate or something like that. Now, you could also say that, like, do the elements need to be, like, a huge mechanic? Not necessarily. I don't think they need to be, like, as big as they are in something like Genshin, where that's kind of, like, you know, the main thing of the combat. But my problem isn't necessarily that they aren't, like, a big thing. It's that they feel like they just don't really matter at all. Like, they feel more like of a requirement of the game than an actual, like, interesting mechanic. But to be honest, like, I don't even think it would be so bad if Dot was actually getting stuff, because Dot does definitely feel like the main, like, elemental archetype, but it just hasn't gotten anything. A lot of the newer characters don't really care that much about the elements, or they just implant their own element anyway, so they just don't really care about the enemy's weakness. And the fact that Dot hasn't gotten anything in over a year does kind of hurt, not gonna lie. Now, I don't think that this Dot needs to get stuff, like, all the time, especially with Remembrance being the new big thing. But being the only archetype that doesn't have a dedicated support is pretty bad, I'm not gonna lie. They're just, I don't know, I think the elements are kind of synonymous with, like, a bigger issue of the fact that there are just so many mechanics in StarRail that have just kind of been abandoned or feel kind of underdeveloped. Like, another example is, like, the skill point stuff. Like, we got characters like Sparkle, and then we just didn't get anything after that. Like, you feel like they just make mechanics, and then they just kind of just get abandoned. Now, that's not to say I dislike any of the new mechanics you've been getting, even if I do kind of, you know, clown on Break a lot. It just feels like they developed these things, and then just gave up halfway through in favor of something else. But, I don't know, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.